What is up, my friends and fellow busy bees? Today we're going to go over 5 mistakes to avoid when it comes to furniture hardware, because as good as it is to share the tips and tricks and things that work and hacks and ways to make your life easier with furniture refinishing, I am someone who likes to learn from people's mistakes and hear the things not to do, because it just kind of lays it out plain and clear for me. I'm a very to the point, transparent person. I'm a Capricorn. I don't know if that means anything. I'm also an only child. I got a lot of stuff going on. I'm dynamic. I'm a straight shooter. So I like to know what I should do and also what I should not do. And if you are somebody who's like me, I hope that this episode is helpful to you. And before we get into the episode, a disclaimer that, of course, I'm calling these mistakes, but some of them are more personal preference related. So if you wholeheartedly disagree with me from the depths of your being on any of these, that's totally fine. Don't take it as a personal attack. I'm just someone talking bullshit in their bedroom. It's all good. I don't need to hear about it. I support your opinion, etc., etc. Okay, let's jump in. First mistake to avoid when it comes to furniture hardware is waiting to determine which hardware you're going to put onto the piece until you have completed the makeover on the piece. So staining, top coating, or painting and top coating the piece, and then looking at the holes that are there on that piece of furniture and starting to research what you could put in it. And there's a few different reasons that this is a mistake. The first being the design element more generally. I think that you should be putting as much intentionality and planning into the hardware on your piece as you are for all the other design elements that you're bringing to the piece. The color that it's going to be, if there's going to be any added details like a stencil or a liner. The hardware is, in my opinion, an equally important part of that whole design process, and it shouldn't be an afterthought that you just throw on after the fact. Sometimes I literally have hardware that I'll come across and that will inspire a whole design in my head, or I'll have an idea of like the vibe that this would go great with, and I'll keep an eye out for pieces that match the hardware, or I'll look at pieces that I have in my inventory and find ways to make them over to match the hardware versus doing the opposite. Because I think sometimes if you look at pieces, you can kind of tell when the hardware was an afterthought and it was just like thrown on there. There wasn't much like thought as to whether it goes with the piece or the lines of the piece. It just kind of looks disjointed to me sometimes. So if you're paying attention to that from the beginning and you're taking that into account from the get-go, you can ensure that it has that seamless look, because that can be an element that impacts whether or not that piece sells or how quickly it sells. So you really want that piece to look like it was intentionally designed as it is, because then someone's gonna look at it, immediately love it, and envision it in their space. Another reason you want to avoid the mistake of determining the hardware to put onto your piece after the fact of flipping it is because you may have to drill new hardware holes and fill the old ones that are there. And if that's the case, it's really difficult to fill and then stain or paint the filler and then top coat that tiny area and have it be seamlessly integrated into the piece. Chances are you're going to have to at least do another layer of top coat. If not, take it all back, prime it, then paint it, and then top coat it. Because especially with a painted piece, the primer is the unifying product that is bringing those materials all together to make them look seamless and like there wasn't holes there before, essentially. So if you wait till the end and then you realize that the hardware you want to use requires different spacing with the holes, you're going to regret it. I also prefer to drill new hardware holes after I have prepped that piece but have yet to do any design elements to it, because if you're going to be drilling new holes, sometimes that can get messy and, knock on wood, God forbid something goes wrong and you have to re-drill the hole again or something. You want to basically ensure that you have a blank slate to work off of so that your finished product is going to look as good as possible. So think about your hardware from the beginning, plan it into your process so you can sequence those items appropriately, and you'll end up with a seamless look and a cohesive design. The second mistake to avoid when it comes to furniture hardware is skipping the cleaning and scuffing process if you're going to be painting your hardware. I talk often about the fact that using old hardware from previous pieces is a great way to cut down on the supply costs in your project. And even if you don't like the hardware as it currently looks, you can give it a whole new look by either cleaning it up and just bringing it back to its original finish, and or painting it black, painting it gold, copper, silver, purple, whatever works with the design of your piece. And that can really elevate the look of the hardware, especially if it currently has shading and patina on it. If you just hit it with a shiny gold, sometimes it can completely change the look of that hardware, make the lines look so much more modern and contemporary. I have been amazed on more than one occasion of how much hardware has looked different after I've painted it, and it can look old and vintage, and then all of a sudden, she looks brand new. But the reason you want to avoid skipping the cleaning and scuffing process prior to painting is because you want this, especially this part of the piece, to maintain its integrity long term. And if you're just putting paint over a handle that has maybe gotten decades and decades of wear, maybe a century of wear, chances are there is a lot of dirt, grime, patina, and other buildup on that handle that is going to be sandwiched in between the original hardware and that paint or whatever product you use to paint it. And that's going to stop it from fully gripping to the hardware, and probably over time it's going to either chip off or start to just rub off in general because it's not actually adhered to the hardware, it's just hanging on to the dirt. And if you don't think that these pieces are that gross or dirty, I double dog dare you to pop that hardware in some hardware soup and scrub it down after it has been boiling in water and vinegar. And take a look at that water afterwards and you just tell me how much dirt was not on there. It is horrific what comes out of those things. And sometimes you really can't tell until you start to boil it and you see it just kind of like peeling off. Because if you think about it, that's the part of your piece that is getting the most wear and the most use and is getting the most contact to our skin and one of the dirtiest parts of our skin for the most part. Like, you got your little grubby kid hands touching it, you're touching it multiple times a day to open it, to grab clothes out, or to put the kids' art supplies away, or whatever you're using that piece for. And it's going to get a lot of wear over time, and it's going to accrue a lot of dirt, a lot of grime, a lot of grease, a lot of oils from our skin. And if you got the piece from somebody else that hardware came off of, you don't even know what they were touching. So for your own peace of mind, for my own peace of mind on your behalf, please do not skip this step of cleaning and scuffing your hardware. I've talked more thoroughly in the past about hardware soup that you can make. Go back and find that in a previous episode. It was within like the last 5 episodes, I want to say, that I went through that process. And in order to scuff the hardware, I just use sandpaper. I use kind of like a medium grit sandpaper, probably around 180 to 220-ish. And you just scuff it up, just back and forth on the hardware, underneath, back sides. I like to do it all to be thorough. You don't want to like have such a low grit that it's making an imprint and like scratching deep into that surface of the hardware, but you do want it to scuff off any shiny finish that there may be and just kind of rough up those surfaces so that the paint has something to really adhere to and to stick to. When you're painting your hardware, make sure that you are doing multiple thin layers versus trying to get one thick, opaque, gloopy coat right off the bat. That won't dry properly and it won't adhere as good long term as multiple thin layers that can be built up over time. And I always recommend putting a clear coat afterwards as well. You can find clear spray top coats and you can find them in multiple finishes as well. So if you want more of a satin look versus a matte look, you can have the flexibility of doing that after you add the color as well. The third furniture hardware mistake to avoid is one that what I thought was more of a personal preference, but I've recently seen a couple people post about their hatred of this as well. So I feel like it might be a little bit more universal than I previously thought, which is to put knobs where there were previously handles on a piece, which means that there would be two knobs that were in very close proximity on a dresser drawer, for example, which should have obviously been a handle. Or God forbid, there's 4 holes on one dresser drawer and you put 4 knobs on there, so there's 4 knobs per drawer. I don't want to be rude, but it's pretty ugly, guys. It doesn't look great. And also, it's not really cost effective because you could be buying half as many handles compared to how many knobs you're purchasing. So logistically, it's not to your benefit as well because you're probably paying more supplies-wise. Although I do recognize that handles can be much more expensive than knobs per unit. Fair enough. But on top of that, if we think of the logistics of using the piece, there's no need for that. So as a solution to this, either look for handles, and if you can't find handles that have that specific spacing, because I know sometimes the spacing gets weird and we're really limited in the options that are available, you can look for adjustable handles. Those are awesome, and there's a few different designs that those come in depending on the piece and what kind of look you're going for. Again, you can use the old hardware that came on that piece if you have it, if it's available to you. And if you don't like the look of it currently, you can look at ways to switch it up, so paint it or clean it or something. Sometimes flipping it upside down too changes the whole look of it and just the way your eyes hit the piece and draw up or down it. But please, just stop doing the multiple knobs where there should be handles. It looks so weird. I'm uncomfortable. The fourth mistake to avoid when it comes to furniture hardware is throwing out the old hardware on a piece when you intend to buy new hardware for that makeover. You know I am Mrs. Frugality over here. If ever I can save money, I'm gonna try to do it. And I want you to try to adopt this mentality too. I understand that space can be limited and hanging on to every piece of hardware when you're not actually using it can start to take up a lot of space and you have to find creative solutions to store it all. Been there, done that. I understand it can become a lot, but you're so much better off hanging on to that hardware and then regularly looking at your stash to try and find options to use on your pieces versus buying new, because we're always trying to find ways to keep our supply costs low so we can keep our profit margins high so that we are putting as much money into our pockets from our flips as possible. And one way to do that is to access as many free supplies as possible, which the hardware that is coming on the piece that you have, that you purchased for your inventory or you found at the side of the road or somebody gifted to you because they were trying to get rid of a piece of furniture from their house, falls into that category. So hang on to this furniture hardware. And there's a few reasons for this. The first being that trends are changing all of the time, and the pieces that you're getting your hands on right now are probably, chances are, they're older pieces, because that's normally what people are getting rid of. And although that hardware may not be something that's in style right now, best believe that at some point in time it's going to come back in style. Do you see all this mid-century modern stuff that is so hot in so many areas right now? That's stuff from the 70s and the 80s and whenever else would be considered mid-century, maybe older than that. I'm not a history buff, but that was stuff that somebody 10 years ago would not be interested in having in their home. It would be something that people are trying to get rid of, but now it's harder than ever. You can find these pieces for thousands and thousands of dollars for sale that look exactly like this. So if you had a bunch of hardware sitting around from that time period, wouldn't that be so helpful at this point in time? Trends change, they come, they go from one end of the spectrum to the other. So hang on to the hardware, even if you don't think currently that it's something that people will want. It may be next year or in a couple years. Another reason that it's great to hang on to this is that although you may not think that that works for one of the styles that you typically do for your pieces, like maybe you stick to a certain kind of genre that you do or stuff that you're comfortable with or something that's kind of your specialty. If you're doing custom work, you may accept projects that people have a vision for and you know that you could execute, although it's not maybe your personal preference or personal style. And that hardware could come in handy and be exactly what they're looking for on their piece. And again, if you are able to keep those supply costs low, you are going to have more money in your pocket at the end of the day. So regularly looking at that stash, when somebody comes to you and says, I'm thinking of doing this and this and this on the piece, you can say, okay, I'm going to send you some hardware options. Go through your stash. If there's a couple options there that would work, send them to the client. You can send them options for ones that you would purchase new as well. But sometimes they're like, oh, that's so cool. I haven't seen something like that before. I want to use that stuff. That happens all the time with custom clients that I have, because stuff on Amazon and different things that are options online are beautiful and great, and they have a time and a place, but a lot of people use a lot of the same ones. So when you have something that's really unique and stands out, people are drawn to that if they have that same type of style and they're willing to do something a little bit more bold. So being able to offer them that option and they get that unique kind of one-of-a-kind piece is going to appeal to the right customer. So hang on to those things. You never know when it will come in handy. And like I mentioned earlier, this hardware can also be transformed and changed. So although you may not love the look of it today, there are many iterations of what that hardware could look like in the future if you put a little bit of work into it, keeping the supply costs low and the profit high. So you can clean that hardware, boil it, scrub it, get it down to its raw format, whatever that looks like. If it's bronze, beautiful. If it's just metal, looks great too. And keep it as is. You can also clean it and then paint it. Like I said, there's different color options for that. You could also update the hardware itself. So if it has a back plate with it, you could just remove that and use the handle itself. And you can also make amendments to that hardware by removing certain portions of it so that it looks a little bit more simple and a little less ornate. One option that comes to mind with this is the Chippendale pulls that are super common on like farmhousey kind of dressers. If you take some bolt cutters and kind of pull on the welding of the back plate until it comes loose, you can get that almost like spade looking back plate, I don't know how to explain it, off, and it's just the plain handle that remains with the two little nubbins that hold it in place. If you look up Chippendale handle or Chippendale pull, you'll know what I mean. You see them everywhere on like the older pieces, but those can be made a lot more simple, and it doesn't give it a modern look per se, but it's a modern look to a vintage feel, if that makes sense. I think they look so sophisticated and it looks so nice on a little vintage piece, but it doesn't have all the like ornate shit that we were adding back in the 90s. And if you have a piece that has maybe more vintage lines to it, but you're going in with a more modern color, so it has that mix of old and new, you can also use a mixture of hardware and do maybe a couple old knobs, but then buy some new handles that go with it and kind of mix and match that old and new with some from your stash and some that you order online to make the perfect curation of that. And if you find things that are the right shapes, but they're maybe a different color tone, you can then paint both of those so that they match. Like, you are in charge, just a reminder. You can do whatever you want. There's no right or wrong way to go about this, and it's all about letting your mind envision this stuff and try out new things. Like, you never know if it's going to work until you try it. And the last reason you should hang on to the old hardware instead of buying new maybe happens a little bit less, but it will be very rewarding if it works out, that you can help another refinisher who is looking for a couple extra pulls or knobs because maybe they have 6 of them and they're doing a piece that's 8 and they're on the lookout for a couple others. There's only so many styles that were happening back in the day, so a lot of these pieces have made their rounds either in your area, in your country, around the world, and I often see furniture refinishers, because I obviously follow a lot of them, who are like, I have this many of these, but I need this many. Does anybody happen to have any in their stash? And better believe every time I see that, I go downstairs and I look through mine to see if I can help somebody out, because I would want the same if I was in that predicament, right? Because how frustrating is that when you like find it and you're like, I know this will be perfect, it will look so good, or like my client wants it, but I can't find it anywhere else. If somebody could just come to your rescue and be like, I got you, girl. Keep an eye out. She's coming in the mail. That's what it's all about. It's all about helping each other out. And the 5th and final mistake to avoid when it comes to furniture hardware is to try eyeballing it when you are drilling new holes for the hardware. I don't know if people actually do this, but if you have thought about doing it, please do not. Unless you have a very mathematical brain and you can zero in on it, chances are they are not going to line up and it will look weird once you put them all back in place. I don't know if you've ever seen a dresser, but like the drawers line up pretty straight, and if the hardware that's supposed to be on top of each other stacked in the same spot does not, it's going to be pretty obvious. There are many different methods for drilling new hardware holes and figuring out where the center point is or where you should place the hardware. I think I'm going to actually do a whole episode on different ways to do this because I've seen quite a few different ways that people do this, and I've tried some myself. And I know everyone's brain just works a little bit differently too, so I'm going to put together some of the techniques that I've tried and seen and bring a full episode to you with that in the coming weeks. But in the meantime, if you need to do it, give it a Google. But please, for the love of God, do not just eyeball it when you are drilling new holes on a piece. Unless it's just like maybe a side table that needs one little knob and it doesn't matter as much. Even still, if you get someone who's particular, they're gonna notice it if it's off center. Some people just have a really great brain for that. I'm not one of those people, which is why I'm meticulous with my measurements. However, I know they're out there, so just beware. If you want to make sure you don't miss that podcast when I bring it to you, going over the different ways to measure out where to drill new holes, make sure that you subscribe to the Friday Furniture Focus newsletter. It's my monthly newsletter that I send out that gives a recap of all the podcast episodes from the last week, a little update about what I got going on in my life and what I've been working on lately, and just my day-to-day musings and thoughts, as well as sharing furniture flip tips from other furniture refinishers, highlighting those who are running awesome furniture refinishing businesses and inspiring me every day in the work that I do, and a lot of other fun stuff. So if you want to sign up for that, make sure you head to meldiditherself.ca. I will also link it in the show notes of this episode, and keep an eye on your inbox. And something you may not know about me, I love little motivational messages. They always get me fired up, and I keep a running list of ones that are especially catchy or speak to me in the Notes app on my phone. So I end every podcast episode with one that I've noted down over the years in the hopes that you leave our time here each week feeling inspired, motivated, and ready to take on whatever comes your way this week. So today's Mel's motivational message is: expect nothing, appreciate everything. And this is one of those quotes that I like to keep close to my heart and at top of mind day to day, and really use it as kind of like a mantra, I guess, of sorts, of how I live my life, because I really think that it's the only way that you're going to have true joy and happiness in your day, is to appreciate the things around you and have that gratitude and have it at top of mind and look for the things to be grateful for in your day, because it will then cause you to continue to look for good things versus focusing on the bad things that happen and looking for those. Because, to quote another Mel's motivational message, wherever focus goes, energy flows. It's a little sum from Tony Robbins. But wherever you're focusing, you're going to start to notice those things in your day. So you have to make a really concerted effort to notice the good stuff and the things that you're grateful and appreciative of and for, in order to make that the default in your brain. And if you find that you're a very negative person and you aren't doing this, you're kind of setting yourself up for failure in that regard. You're going to continue to notice the negative and live in the negative and feel the negative, because you're not doing the work to find the positive and focus on it. So expect nothing, appreciate everything. I also think that setting expectations is one way that we can also really set ourselves up for success and ensure that our moods are where we want them to be, because expectation setting is the thing that you have control of versus the things that happen in your day may not be within your control. And if you're someone who's kind of type A, or you set expectations for yourself, and even worse for others, for the people around you, who are the things that you cannot control. You cannot control the people around you, if you need that reminder, but you can control your expectations of them. And so if you expect someone to act a certain way and they act that way because they always act that way, and why wouldn't they, then you're kind of at ground zero, you're neutral. They have met your expectations. But if you're setting expectations for someone that is way different from how they act normally, and they've never met that expectation for you, and yet you still have that bar up there and you expect and want them and hope for them to meet that, but they don't want that for themselves, then you're setting yourself up for failure because you're setting that expectation somewhere that isn't realistic, and you're getting your hopes up that they're going to meet it when there's no evidence to support that. So expect nothing. Not like expect nothing from nobody in a pessimistic way, but set your expectations and know that nothing is coming to you. You have the right to nothing. Don't expect that things are going to come to you easily. Don't expect or anticipate or feel entitled to things in life. Work hard, move towards those things, move towards hitting your goals, taking the next best step and taking action towards the life that you want and the things that you want in life, for sure. That's the only way you're going to get to them. But don't expect that they'll come to you or that you're entitled to them. Expect nothing. Appreciate everything. Appreciate all the little things that come to you along that path of trying to reach those goals, of trying to hit those milestones, and of the small things day to day in life that you need to notice, appreciate, have gratitude for, and then more of those things will come. But don't expect that they're going to come or expect that you're entitled to them, because then you're just setting your expectations somewhere that you shouldn't. And Mel told you not to do it, so remember that. All right. That's it for now. I appreciate your time, and I will catch you guys next week.